Dr. Holder, I wanted to ask you about this idea that you would almost believe from some of the conversation here that you can't do statistically valid research in this area because there are all these hidden choices being made, that you can't get to an apples comparison. You do a lot of research in this area. Obviously, you have to control for different variables. Can you talk to us about your view of what an apples to apples comparison looks like?
Sure, thank you for that question. As an economist, I am trained in techniques which will, when I am trying to compare outcomes between two groups, I can control for certain variables that might influence the outcome. So for example, in my research where I compared Black working women, full-time working women, and non-Hispanic white full-time working men, some of the variables, that's economics lingo, forgive me for that, but some of the variables that would contribute to a gender wage gap would include things like age, work experience, educational attainment, whether they are married, whether the worker is married, whether the worker has children, whether the worker has small children, where does the worker live. So in my research, I use several methodologies which control for the very things that would contribute to the gender wage gap. And even given that, I still find a differential between, in my research, white full-time working men and Black full-time working women that cannot be explained by having children, that cannot be explained by a difference in educational attainment, that cannot be explained by work experience, length of work experience. All of those things have been taken into account. And what I still find is that after all of those contributing factors, which might explain why a white male would earn more than a Black female in the same occupation, given the same characteristics, that I've taken that into account. And in fact, in my research, I use 3 different methodologies, and the final methodology is actually a really sophisticated one that pairs white men and Black women with very similar characteristics in the same occupations, and there is still a differential in pay that cannot be ascribed to anything else but biased treatment.
Thank you, Dr. Holder. And Ms. Pooh, I want to ask you, we heard one of our panelists question, is there a problem here at all? I'd love to get your perspective on that. And then the issue of, if only women were better negotiators, all of this might go away.
2 things. On the negotiation front, in the domestic work context, there is no job security, no clear agreements or contracts, and therefore, in attempting to negotiate for something as simple as a sick day, you risk losing your job. And so what we hear time and time again is pervasive fear of asking for something as simple as an afternoon off to go to your child's PTO meeting, to a raise, an annual raise. And people won't do it because they will risk losing their jobs. They lack the power to negotiate in the workplace. And secondly, this idea that women are choosing lower paid work because benefits and other forms of compensation exist. That is just simply not true for this entire sector of care work. Wages are low and benefits are virtually non-existent.
And in your view, would the Paycheck Fairness Act make these inherent discrepancies better or worse for women in these positions?
I think that would make them better.
Transparency seems to be a fundamental issue here. Dr. Kim, do you think that there is power, and even with respect to negotiation, in that transparency?
Absolutely. If you know what other people are being paid, you can negotiate better. But I want to say something about that as well. If women try to negotiate, often they're not hired because they're seen as too aggressive. So women are really viewed and treated differently than men. It's not that we don't negotiate as well as men. And also, you know, if the studies that do find women start out equal to men, 5 years later, they're not. And it's not because they have kids, it's because they're not trained or promoted or mentored.
Yeah.
So again, different treatment is another big explanation. And finally, I just wanted to add to the earlier discussion that, like Dr. Holder said, our research controls for hours worked, productivity, even preferences, and you still find a gender wage gap. It's really different treatment, subtle biases, and the government should have policies so that this kind of discrimination can't continue.
Thank you for holding this hearing, Chairman Byers. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.